Hey everyone. So today we're going to be looking at some Illustrator tips and tricks. Hopefully you were here for the lecture, and this is kind of a review, just a recap on some of the things that we talked about so that you guys can go back on your own time and check this out in a little bit more detail. So the first thing we're going to look at here is selecting and using colors, both globally and being able to select them in different ways. So I have some different boxes here with some different colors that I'm using, and I've actually already gone through and saved these out as swatches. Anytime you need to save out a new swatch, as long as you have that specific color selected, you can just come over here to the swatch palette and click new swatch down here, and that will bring up a new swatch window. One thing that's important to remember is to click global as you guys are doing this so that we can make some global changes here, and you'll see why in a second. So once I've saved out all of these specific swatches, I can basically take all of them and come in here to the new color group. And with that, we can title that whatever we would like. So I just have these new swatches here that all have to do with this specific illustration, and those can all be found within each one of these shapes. So I have the blue for the fill, and on the stroke I'm using the green. These ones have some different transparencies being used. Obviously a solid, and then another solid with a stroke, and then another shape that has a pattern that we've included inside, which is using our pink here as well. So we're using all three of these colors to create each one of these shapes. So one thing that we could do is, I'm just going to make a couple of copies of these so we can see this being used. So one thing that we could do is we could use our magic wand tool. With our magic wand tool, we can go over and select specific colors. And what that's going to do is it's going to select anything that has that fill within it, right? Or that specific pattern, or that color with the opacity there as well. So that is one way that we could utilize the magic wand tool and select some tools, but it doesn't get quite as specific. So for example, if I wanted to select everything that was blue and had this green stroke to it, another thing that I could do would be just select that shape, come up here to the select tool, and go to same. And within this, it has a bunch of different options. You could do whatever has that fill color in it, whatever has the fill and stroke, whatever has the opacity, so on and so forth. So let's do the fill and stroke here, and what that's going to do is it's actually going to select everything that has a blue fill and a green stroke. So in another case, I might want to select this green. Well, if we tried to use the magic wand to select this green, it's going to select all the greens, whether they're opaque or not. Then let's say we just wanted to select the greens with that opacity that we've selected there of 46. So same thing, I could go to select same and go to opacity, and then it would select all the shapes that just have that opacity. It doesn't really matter on the specific color that you're using there. So that's another way that we could use that there as well. One other cool thing is, so I've made my swatches and I've actually separated them into these this new color group down here. So let's say we're working on a large illustration and we're utilizing, a handful of colors, and we want to make some global color changes to all of these colors that are being used within the entire illustration as a whole. Maybe we want to change a yellow to more of a marigold, or a blue to some sort of green or something like that. Well, instead of having to go into each one of these, select, maybe go into the different gradients that are being used, change the colors throughout that, and then also the different patterns that are being used and change the colors. That can be a bit of a hassle. So one way that we can do this is just by changing these global colors on the fly through the swatches. So if I double click into one of these colors here, it was really, I brought up that it was important to select this global, and the reason why is if I click the preview button here, now as long as this is a global color, any sort of change that I make to this color will happen throughout the entire illustration wherever that color is being used. So it's not only making it in the solid, it's making it in the strokes. It's also applying this to my gradient and anything that might have an opacity to it there as well. So I can do that for any of these colors that I'm using. I might want to, let me hit the preview. I might want to make something like this a little bit more contrasting. And you'll notice that not only is it, again, doing it in the gradient within the opacity, but also within those specific patterns that we've made previously that are including that swatch color as well. So this is a great tool to be able to go through and make some global changes to colors within your illustration on the fly and not have to go into each one of those shapes individually. So the next thing that we're going to look at is some type manipulation. So I have this text that I've written out here in illustration. I'm using Mission Gothic Bold here. And let's say we wanted to make some alterations to that text to make it a little bit more interesting, maybe making it more like a specific mark. Well, the first thing we want to do is anytime that we have this working text, I can still come in here and type any additional letters that I want to and make any sort of changes. And once we have that where we want it, then what we're going to want to do is, I always like to copy the text, leave that original the way that it is so that we can always come back to it if need be. So I'm just going to copy that, either Command C and paste, or you can use the Option key and just drag and click down there. And we're going to come up here to type. We're going to select this one here. We're going to come up to type, and we're going to go to create outlines. And what that does is it's no longer a group of letters or text. It's now shapes. So I can no longer edit this like text, but what it does give me the ability to do is to edit it like shapes. So now, instead of being able to go in and double click and type on these, I can actually treat each one of these like a specific shape. So if I use my direct select tool, my white arrow, I can actually go into some of these letter forms and move them if I want to, and kind of position them to start to curate them over the specific shape here. So I'm just grabbing different anchor points and bringing them out. As long as I hold my shift key, it'll bring that out straight for me. And I'm just kind of making some rough alterations to this word mark here. So as long as I click and drag and grab several of these anchor points at once, I can kind of manipulate them all at once, or I can manipulate them individually if I need to here as well. So as you can see, I'm just making some quick sort of changes here to get some overall type manipulation. So we've outlined the type, and we've been able to manipulate this a little bit further here and kind of create a custom typeface here. Now, another thing that we could do is by selecting the direct selection tool. Let me use this T here. Is you'll notice when I select on the direct selection tool, it brings up these little dots in the corners, and what that is it gives you the ability to make live rounded corners here. So if I click on one of those, you'll notice that if I start to bring it in, it's actually going to round out all the corners within this letter form. Now, that's kind of cool, but what it doesn't necessarily give me the ability to do is select and choose which ones I want. So even though I may want the ends to be rounded, I might not want my sort of corners inside to be rounded. So another way that I can do that is just by selecting the individual anchor points by holding Shift, or clicking and dragging and holding Shift to select all of them except the ones that are in the that are in the inside there. Now I can actually go through and make the changes just to the specific anchor points that I've selected, basically, right? So if we wanted to make some unique rounded corners on some of those letter forms, that would be one way we could do that as well. And you'll notice that we can click and drag in here, and we can also go in and type a specific corner radius up here at the top as well. Maybe you want that to be 10, and you want that to be throughout all of these. You're going to use that 10 to kind of create a unique typeface. So that's another way that we can kind of start to manipulate the type once we've outlined it, utilizing these live corners. So the next thing that we're going to look at is the blend tool here. And this can be a really handy tool to change shapes from one shape to another, and also have a gradient of color change. So you'll notice that I've already kind of done this down here between these two different shapes. You can see how it starts as this circle and kind of ends as this more organic shape, the circle being blue, the organic shape being green, and that transition from the circle into that organic shape as well as from the blue to the green in this designated sort of path that I've created here as well. And in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is select both of the shapes that we're going to blend. We need to come over here to the blend tool, and we can actually double click into that blend tool to bring up some options. So we have the option of doing smooth color, specified steps, or specified distance. We're going to go ahead and do specified steps right here, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit 5 for now. Now, what that's done is it's told the computer that we're going to do 5 steps within this blending process, and I've already selected these 2 shapes. So as long as I have the blend tool selected, all I need to do is click on the first one and then the second one, and it'll actually make that blend for us. So pretty awesome. It's gone from this blue circle to this green organic shape. Now you'll notice that I put a bit of a curve on this one, and we can do the same thing to this path here. As long as we come up to our path, we can just select our pen tool and add an anchor point here, and then manipulate, how we want that path or that curve to happen. To add a bit of a curve, we can go to the anchor point tool and bring that back into a curved shape here. And this just gives us the ability to, change this, the sort of direction that we're going to have with it. That will sort of dictate the path that we're taking through this blend tool here. So that's one way to use the blend tool to kind of create 2 organic shapes and changing colors there. Another way to use the blend tool is to create drop shadows like I've done here for this illustration text. So I'm sort of borrowing from the previous step that we've done here. I applied a solid color and a stroke. And a lot of times when I'm doing this drop shadow, I think it's easier to have a solid color and a stroke so that we can kind of see the drop shadow a little bit easier. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to copy this and paste it. So I'm going to go Command C and Command V to paste it in here. And I'm just going to kind of place it behind this, this one here and go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back. So now it's sort of sitting behind there. And I'm actually going to just go ahead and make the solid fill the same as my stroke. So I'm just going to literally drag that stroke right into the solid. And maybe bump this over just a little bit here. So we can see now that we're already starting to get our sort of drop shadow that's happening, but it's not quite the drop shadow that we're looking at, right? You can still just tell that these are 2 different shapes, and we can see that this sort of connection on the bottom one that we've done more seamlessly is not quite the same up at the top. And that's where the blend tool can come in really handy. So again, I'm going to go over to the blend tool. I'm going to double click on that. And this time I'm going to put in a specified step of, say, 30. I want this to kind of be a smooth color transition here. So again, as long as I have both of these selected, I'm just going to drag over both of those with my arrows. I'm going to come to my blend tool here. And as long as I click on both of those, you'll see that it's actually blending those 2 pretty seamlessly. Now, if I get in tight, what's actually happening is there's 30 different steps that are making this sort of blend or this drop shadow. But what the illusion happens is this sort of seamless drop shadow, and instead of having to go in and manually make all those connections from the corner of the typefaces, I'm able to kind of seamlessly create the blend between those 2 different type paths there, or shape paths at this point.